This is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to another episode of the Chickenhead Chronicles. Now, I'd mentioned in my introduction that I'd grown up with a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64, but I never owned a Commodore 128 until I won one on an eBay auction a few weeks ago, and it appears to be in really nice shape. It did not ship with a power supply, and I don't have a power supply for it, but I have two of them coming in. So I'm just holding my breath in anticipation. But what I thought I'd do is get this little guy cracked open and see what's inside of it. Now, this little guy is actually fairly clean. I do need to take some cleaner to it and polish it up a little bit, but I don't think it's going to need any retro brighting. A little towel down there. But all of the ports in the back are in good shape. They're not broken out or anything. All those are in fine shape. The physical devices seem to still be in good shape. Now, C128 apparently has 6 screws, not anything proprietary, just standard Phillips head screws. Here, my little C64, you're going to hold those screws for me, thank you. Not too hard to get open. There's no factory warranty seal here like there are in some machines, so this may or may not have been opened in the past. For all I know, this thing has been modified in the past. We'll find out together. 1, 2, and there's our third screw. Now I know that there's some LEDs on here too that are going to need to be disconnected, so we'll very carefully remove the keyboard cover. Okay, so back in Illinois when I was but a wee lad of about 18, this was about 25, 30 years ago. Yeah, oh my goodness, 30 years ago. I worked at a camera store, and we had a Noritsu 1-hour photo lab in the camera store that I ran. And we had the repair guy out there one day, and he was looking at the machine, getting it set up, and he said to me, "Douglas," he says, "if there's only one thing that I can teach you that you carry with you the rest of your life," he said, "use the right tool for the job." And that has stuck with me for 30 years now. Now, it doesn't mean that I always do it, but when I run into a situation where I get frustrated trying to open something like this, that just springs to my head. Just use the right tool for the job, and suddenly a difficult job becomes fairly easy. So I just use my little guitar pick spacer there, and she pops right open. Now, let's see, get a better angle here. So, if you learn anything today, it's use the right tool for the job. Over here we have our LED, and over here we have our keyboard. Now I had a line on a C128D right before I ordered this. I'm just removing the grounding cable here. And I think I was about to win the auction if I just would have bid just a tiny bit higher. I was thinking, oh man, that's sweet. But I realized, of course, it did not come with a keyboard. And I started doing a little research on just how difficult it is to find a 128D keyboard. It's like next to impossible. So I bypassed that auction. I let it go, let somebody else get it. It would be nice to have at some point in time a 128D. They're really very nice and really very beautiful. But I just want one with a keyboard. So there's the guts. Now what we've got here is our RF shielding. I'm going to turn this monitor off. We're getting some glares. Let's remove the RF shielding. Now, good old US of A back in the 80s didn't want anything to interfere with radio frequencies, so they forced everybody to use these this crazy shielding that really didn't do much help, didn't help much of anybody, but it got to be to the point where everybody just put tons and tons of shielding on here. But what Commodore did, and I suppose other people did too, that made it worthwhile, is they then used this government required shielding for heat sinks. So they've got these little clips coming down from the shielding here all over the place, physically touching the chips. Now, after a few years, they don't touch anymore. They move themselves up and such. So that's something I'll look at. But then that conducts heat from the chip, pulls it up into the shield where it's more easily dissipated. So, they took a uncomfortable situation and made something good out of it. So let's get these last screws out of this shield. Now, I like the way that this shield works better than some other cases that use those little metal clips that you have to bend, because those never seem to cooperate, and about half the time you end up slicing your finger open trying to get the little metal shield out because of those little metal bendy clips. I'm sure you guys can identify. Oh, look, there's little bendy things. That's okay. See how many we have. Yep, we have actually quite a few of the little bendy things. So I'm going to grab a little pair of pliers. Okay, so all that fancy pants talk about using the right tool for the job, and I can't find the right tool. I was looking for my little tiny pliers, but I have a little pair of nippers here. But as long as I don't use any force on them, all I need is to grab them and move the little pieces of metal out of the way without cutting them. I'm not using them as a cutting tool. I'm just using them to get a little leverage in there. Pull them out of the way. Use the right tool for the job, unless you don't have the right tool, in which case use whatever's, like right in front of you, and you'll be just fine. Appears to be all, which means there'll be 20 more hidden ones. Something's holding it in place over here. Now, I'm also listening to something rattle inside this case, and I'm not too pleased about it. So let's see. Another little screw right there. What's causing the rattle? Put this over here. No, I don't hear it. I'm sure I just heard something rattle. Oh well. Now let's get a little closer here. Okay. So the C128 is kind of an amazing little beast here. It's got two CPUs, of course. It's got the Z80. Sorry, all my British viewers, Z80. But we Americans call it Z over and over in America, where we speak American. So it's got the Z80 CPU, and this little guy apparently is the first guy that is activated when you power it on, and it figures out whether it's going to boot into Commodore 128 mode, Commodore 64 mode, or CPM mode, which I'm actually looking forward to playing around with CPM. Here we go. Here is a teeny tiny little screw that was wobbling around in the case. I'm glad I found that before I powered it on, and it shorted something out and I didn't know what was going on. So the Z80, I think that little guy is supposed to run at 4 megahertz, but from what I understand, it really runs at 3 megahertz. CPM mode on the Commodore 128 is supposedly actually fairly slow in the overall scheme of things, and not quite as exciting as one might hope, but I'm looking forward to playing with it anyways. And then of course there's the main CPU here, which is an upgraded version of the 6502 called the 8502. This is a R0 4085. Yep, 4685. So that's our main CPU here. And of course under here we have not only the VIC-2 chip, which controls the main video, the 40 column video, but we also have the 80 column video on here. I'll pop that open in a minute. I'm checking out the caps, and they all appear not to be bulging at all. And right now we got 20 people going, replace the caps anyways, Doug, hurry, replace the caps. And that's fine, and I don't disagree with that, but I've been in the computer industry for going on 25, 30 years now, and what I've found is that caps are bad when they start to bulge or when they are appearing like they're leaking, and not necessarily before that. So as long as we carefully take a look at the board and see if we see any signs of bulging or leaking, they're probably okay. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do it, and I probably will, but I'm not going to just rush right out and replace the caps before I try this thing out. Nope, they actually, the board looks like it's got almost no damage at all to it. If you take a peek here, all the traces look good. We don't have any leaks of any sort that I can see. This little dude is wearing a hat. Where is he? Here, that little guy is wearing a little felt hat, which is kind of nice. I'm sure he's quite happy wearing his little felt hat. No, it actually looks pretty good. So over here we have our 128 kilobytes of RAM, expandable all the way up to 512 kilobytes of RAM, which from what I understand almost nothing cares about if you add that much RAM to it. And I have not seen too many expansion cartridges out there. Like on my VIC-20, it has the Penultimate cartridge available, which adds all kinds of features to it. The 64 still has new cartridges available that can add features to it. But the C128, from what I find, doesn't have that many mods that are still available today. Now, one mod that is available for this that I already have, and I'm going to put in here, that is, of course, if I pop the top off and it already has one. Nope, it doesn't. This is the 80 column chip here. Bring that a little closer. This is the 80 column chip, and it's a mixed bag. It's cool in a way, and it stinks in a way, because it's not as powerful as the VIC-2 chip in many ways. It doesn't have any sprites. It doesn't really have the characters, while it supports multiple colors, doesn't really have a multiple colored character mode. So it's not really very good for games. And on the C128, the traditional boxed one, or case like this, it only has 16 kilobytes of video RAM for this chip, which means it'll support 80 column mode, but it won't support some of the higher color 80 column mode with multicolor graphics and bitmaps and things like that, because it doesn't have the RAM to support it. So, in anticipation of getting this thing and hoping it actually works, I ordered a new goodie that I'm going to put in. Got this little guy off of eBay, and this is a solderless version of the 64K video display chip upgrade. Let me just get it open here. Yay. Okay, I got this little guy off of a dealer on eBay who said they were out of stock for it. Whoop, here, Doug, try to let it focus. There you go. They said they were out of stock, but asked them when they were going to get some new ones in. They responded back and said, oh, we're about to put 2 more up on the auction site, so hurry up and grab it. So this has a total of 64K, and the VDC chip comes out and it pops right in there, and then this plugs into the socket. Now, I have heard that these chips, the little sockets right there, the little pins, are a little bit short and sometimes don't make a good connection. So people kludge things together, like wrapping a zip tie around it to hold it down. I'm hoping that I don't run into that problem and that this is one of the better quality ones that I don't need to fiddle with too much to fit it in there. But we'll see. We'll see. So I'll be putting that in there. Now, yeah, I'll probably put it in before I get the power supply. Again, I have no idea if this thing even works. The vendor I bought it from said that he didn't have a way to test it, which is pretty much the eBay way of saying, I don't want to be responsible whether or not this thing works, so I'm just going to say I couldn't test it. But, you know, I think I have a good feeling about it. I think it's going to work. And if not, it's just going to make an interesting project to try and get it to work. Look at that. Nice. Yeah, everything looks like it's in good shape. I do need to get some more silicone grease for heat conduction, or else I may just leave the shield off and I may just put little heat sinks on here. Let me chew on that and see. This thing has so many different video connectors on it. We've got an RF, which I won't use, and we have a standard Commodore 64 connector, which really, these are not bad connectors. These have a predecessor to S-Video, one of the first computers that had the predecessor to S-Video, where it separates the chroma and luma signal and gives you a really nice quality signal if you do it right. Now, I make my own cables that pull the chroma and luma signals out of here and put them on a nice little S-Video. So you can actually plug this into, I'll actually be able to plug this into S-Video on my television and get an absolutely beautiful display out of it. I compared, I happened to be playing Donkey Kong, and I compared it on my C64 with a standard composite cable and the new S-Video cable, and it's just quite a bit better quality. So I'll be doing that. And then over here we've got our RGB connector for our 80 column display. I've got 2 monitors that can support that. I've got a 1902 that should support that just fine, and then I've got an LCD that syncs down to 15 kilohertz that I use with my Amiga that should give me a rock solid 80 column display. All I need to do is build the cable for that. They're certainly not impossible to find, but I may just build my own. So that's a little bit about the C128, my new little toy. I'm looking forward to it. I'll probably continue to use the C64 for games on my Chickenhead Chronicles channel, but I'm really looking forward to looking at some of the business apps that are available on the C128. I'm really looking forward to some of the CPM programs that are available. There's just a very limited amount of information out there on YouTube and just on the web in general. Very limited amount of information about anybody using CPM. So I figure, why not? Let's fill a void and have a little fun and play with CPM. It's a great operating system, a predecessor to DOS, fairly powerful. Yeah, I'll be doing that as soon as I get a 1571 drive. You know, this hobby's very expensive. You know, you spend $100 getting a Commodore 128 in, and then you're like, oh, let me spend a little more to get the graphics enhancer chip. Oh, it doesn't have a power supply. Let me order a power supply. Oh, it doesn't have a disk drive. I could use my 1541, but it's a little slow. Better order a 1571. And my goodness, next thing you know, we're talking real money here. So yeah, that's always a real joy. So next up, we'll be powering this thing up with a power supply. Well, I received the power supply from the gentleman from eBay who said it was a bad power supply for the 128, and I took it apart, and the first thing I noticed that the 4 amp 125 volt fuse was completely gone out of the thing, just didn't exist inside there at all. So I grabbed another fuse and I replaced it, and I replaced the larger fuse that screws in the bottom of it, and boom, the power supply came back to life. I hooked it up to my C128 and it seems to power up just absolutely beautifully. It seems to see all the peripherals just fine. Right now I just have it plugged into my 1541. I will be getting a 1571. I've seen a few of them on eBay, but I'm trying to pace myself, you know, use a little self-control, not spend all the money at one time. But it definitely loads up just fine. Works in 64 mode just fine. I tested the SID chip with many games, and also several of the play commands, and works great. Everything about it works absolutely perfect as far as I can tell. Now, a couple of interesting things I've noticed about the C128 is switching from the 1 megahertz to the 2 megahertz mode blanks the screen in the 40 column mode, which is fine. I knew that. I knew that it did that. But it's just a little bit disappointing that we can't use the full 2 megahertz speed when we create our basic programs in what we're using 90% of the time, which is the 40 column mode. It'd just be great if we could do it, but we can't. I know there's some workarounds where you can have it use 2 megahertz until it hits the main screen scan line, and then slows down to 1 megahertz and then speeds up to 2, and you get yourself 20 or 25% speed increase. So I get it. But what I want to do is I want to see how well it works in basic programs. When I'm writing in BASIC and I get to a point where I've got a for next loop, or I'm pulling in some data or something like that, and I bump it into fast mode and just maybe change the border color to notify people that it's gone into fast mode, and not to think that my programs have crashed, and see if I can utilize it that way, going from fast to slow to speed up the operation of the programs I'm going to create. I'm planning on working on a few games. I've got some ideas in my head for some games, which leads me to the games that are available that were specifically for the C128, of which there were very few, 20, 25 commercial games, I think, maybe. But the games that people have written for it over the decades, you know, I'm sorry, I've seen VIC-20 games that are about on par with them. They're just not taking even remote advantage to what the C28 has to offer. You know, Millifoot, great game, fun game, basic, simple game using the Commodore characters in a Centipede type game. It's a C128. Do something more, create something more. You know, it supports great sprites. It has a sprite editor built in, has fantastic audio. Just blast that audio. Do something out of the ordinary with it. And I'm just not seeing that with the C128, and I don't know why. I mean, okay, it's a 30-year-old platform, you know, but I would think that what hobbyists have done with the Commodore 64 over the years, and how they've just absolutely torn through it and pulled every last ounce of power out of it, that we would have done it for the 128 also, but I just don't see it. So that's something that I want to do. I want to really dig into it understand its capabilities, understand its power, and really write some software that's fun and has beautiful graphics, because it does a decent job in the graphics department. It does okay. Use its drawing features to a greater extent that they've been used in the past in games, and just see what we can do. And maybe we can't do anything. Maybe it's going to be better just to code on the C64, but I want to discover that. I like the fact that it has some split modes where you can actually have high-res graphics on one part of the screen and then text on another part of the screen. I've got some ideas on how I want to utilize that in some games that I want to write. So I think it's fun. I have got it working in 80-column display mode. Let me switch it over. I've got a nice Commodore 1902 monitor here. A little shaky, okay, but it works fantastic in 80-column mode. I did put in the adapter that gives it 64K of VDC RAM. That went in just fine and works just beautifully, so I'm really pleased with that. I had to kludge together a cable. I had a male to female serial cable, and I had to patch some of the wires together. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it'll do for now until I order the parts for the right cable. What I really want to do is wire a cable up so I can go from my Commodore 128 to my nice LCD display that scans at 15 kilohertz. You can look at one of my 10-minute Amiga Retrocast videos about the 15 kilohertz LCD displays. They're still available. I've got a nice Acer, works beautiful with my Amiga. There's absolutely no reason it shouldn't work here. I just have to wire up a cable properly to get it to signal. But it shouldn't be hard. I just got to get the parts to do it. I'm excited. I'm excited about the Commodore 128. I'm excited about seeing what it can do. I always wanted one when I was a youngin', but I went the Amiga route instead. You know, you balance it out, like, stick with 8-bit, go with the Amiga, and I just went with the Amiga. Never regretted it for a minute, but now that I'm slightly older than I was in 1987, I think it's time for me to move on and grab an 8-bit, which reminds me of a new little goodie that just got shipped to me. One of my buddies on one of the Facebook groups, on the Commodore Amiga Facebook group, I believe, said that he had a couple of Plus 4s, one NTSC and one PAL for sale. And then he had some C16s also. I'm not interested in the C16, but I've always had my eye on a Plus 4. I think it's a terribly underrated computer. I agree 100%. Commodore should have done it differently. If they would have just stuck a SID chip in here, just a SID chip, just put the SID chip in, and had some sprites, this thing would have been an absolute killer replacement for the C64 with its 121 colors that are available on here. But it's the lack of decent sound that we got so spoiled on with our SID chips, and the lack of sprites that killed this thing, in my humble opinion. But the computer itself is great. I love the size. I love the performance. It runs at between 1.1 and I think 1.79 megahertz. So it's a speedy little guy, easy access to memory, super easy to program with BASIC 3.5. So I'm looking forward to playing with this little guy and seeing what I can get it to do. I'd love to see how similar the basics are between BASIC 7 on the Commodore 128 and BASIC 3.5 on here, and see if there's a lot of compatibility between the two, so I can carefully code something on the C128 and have it run here. I don't know. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. I'll have to see. But yeah, excited to see what this little guy can do. So, I'm going to be spending a lot of time with my Commodore 128. Right now I'm pouring through the Programmer's Reference Guide. The way I teach myself is I just key in the programs that are in the guides, and then I look at them, I analyze them, I change them to see what change affects what on the screen, and learn that way on exactly how to use these things. And so far, the commands, the new basic commands for new 30-year-old basic commands for accessing the graphics on the screen are easy to use, powerful, albeit very slow. Too slow for games. Most of the drawing commands are. But I want to see how I can use them for background images, for generating background images, and having some fun with that, and then using sprites for the actual games. So we'll see how that goes. I'm really looking forward to it. Looking forward to getting a nice 1571 drive for this. I'm looking forward to getting a 1581 drive for it. I played a little bit with GEOS on it. It's fine. I've got no particular reason to use GEOS, but I want to learn about it and understand it and see how powerful it is. I've heard good things about it. So we'll see. Keep an eye out for new videos in the future. This is Doug from Dynamic Computing, signing out of this edition of Chickenhead Chronicles.